3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome once again to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. I'm Fahima Mohammed, your host and relationship coach. Welcome all of you who are watching and streaming live on Sky Channel 752, or whether you're watching from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. A very warm welcome from all of us here at the studio at British Muslim TV. Thank you so much for joining us and supporting us, and also all your queries and questions. We really do appreciate it. And it's an absolutely amazing time to discuss relationships and to continue, because unfortunately, no matter what's happening around the world, this seems to be an ongoing topic. And with that in mind, we do have another issue to discuss today, which is quite interesting. And we're going to be discussing it with regards to having hopefully some of your stories. I would like to have you share your issues, your challenges, and hopefully you can discuss it by talking to me live here by calling the studio on 01924 231 083. Do ask the bill payer's permission, as standard network rates do apply. Or if you want to WhatsApp us anonymously and send in a message, you're more than welcome to do so as well. And that number is 07585 835 150. Today, we're going to be discussing about how to get along with your in-laws. We talk about, finding a spouse a lot and the challenges of doing that. But we know in our cultures, and especially regardless of where you come from around the world, being Muslim, you don't just marry your spouse, you do marry into the family. Some cultures more than others, some extreme more than others, some really good more than others. And we're going to discuss more details with Muska Jahan, all the way from Texas in Dallas, USA. Assalamu alaikum, Muska.
Walaikum assalam. It is lovely to be joining you. My name is Muska. I am a Muslimah Lifestyle YouTuber. And yes, in today's live, we're going to be discussing how to get along with our in-laws.
Absolutely, sure. Absolutely. And I, again, want to remind the viewers, if you have a story to share, if you are going through something and you want to either, get some tips, get some advice, please do call in. If you even have, a good relationship, share your story tonight so that maybe we can actually help someone who's watching. Maybe we can hear some of your secrets. If not, we do have lots of questions for you tonight, Muska, and it's really important that we discuss this. It's a crucial topic. It's a really serious one as well. As I said before, that Muslims, especially when they get married, it's not just marrying the spouse, it's marrying into their family from both sides. The daughter-in-law into that family, as well as the son-in-law. So when it comes to what you do before anything, tell us, and especially for the audience, what exactly that you do that kind of fills the gap in the Muslim community.
Yes, so I post on YouTube. I've been posting for over 6 years, and it's been lovely. I've been posting so many videos regarding everything that falls under the Muslimah lifestyle, and sometimes that is discussing topics such as marriage and how to handle everyday situations. So I'm just your average Muslimah who has gained experience over time. Alhamdulillah, I have been married for 4 years. I just had a baby, and I actually just moved out of my in-laws' house as well. So.
Oh, congratulations. I didn't realize. Yes. Thank you so much for being with us with such a really challenging time, especially. And you've actually lived with your in-laws. A lot of us realize that, that is something which is also part of marriage, where it's expected in some cultures. How do you find that? If it's a challenge, even if it's not your situation, I'm sure you hear of stories. What are the challenges of living with your in-laws?
You always have to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. One of the lists of that advice that I'm going to be giving you is that you pretty much have to always act as if someone is watching. You have to be very diplomatic in the way you handle everything. You can't completely be like your raw self. You have to be, you have to present that best foot forward, because you don't know how it's going to be taken. There's differences culturally, language barriers, personality differences. There's a whole lot of things that can potentially go wrong. So, yes.
No, definitely. I hear you. It's quite difficult just, marrying somebody that you barely know, or even if you do know, when you live with somebody, it's so different. But then when you move into an entire family, like you said, there's so many different personalities. There's lots of people that are either watching you or getting used to you, and you getting used to them. And as we know in our Muslim community as well, it's usually the women, the new female spouse that will move into the family of their husband. So it is more challenging because they are taken out of their home and they are gone into a new home. Now, let's be real. And I want to also address some of the issues that comes to me a lot of the times here on the platform. We hear a lot of stories. Unfortunately, there are extreme cases, and people do have these stories, which are real. These are real scenarios. So there are extreme cases where when the daughter-in-law moves in to their in-laws' house, and sometimes they are actually taken advantage of. They are actually made to do more than what they used to. How would you deal with something like that?
Let's see. My advice is that, before even the wife and husband get married, it's very important that they vocalize what their expectations are. And it's important that they have the discussion with their potential in-laws on, how much help do they expect around the house? Pretty much all the aspects of marriage that the potential spouses have discussed. So whether or not they want, 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, all these expectations, it's just so much better when you discuss them before you get married. And it's also in your best interest to know your rights Islamically as well.
Oh my gosh, that is so true. I'm glad you said that, because a lot of us, it doesn't really matter which socioeconomic background you come from, how religious, so-called religious families you come from. There's always issues to a certain extent if people are not adhering to their Islamic rights. And a lot of culture comes in between where, it's expected that the new wife that comes into their house and they have to, cook, feed, entertain without the help of even the daughters that may be living there, or the daughters that are even part of that family. So it's a lot of controversy. There's a lot of diversification. There's a lot of understanding. And you're so right that we have to actually address this before marriage. They need to not just sit down with the potential spouse, they need to sit down with the potential in-laws to discuss this. Now, obviously, when you're living in one household, would you think that a majority of the time, I know I'm generalizing here, do you think it's because maybe we're living in the West and we're not as tolerant, or do you think there's a gap between the mindset of the in-laws and the new daughter-in-law or the son-in-law, for example, that can cause these kinds of issues because it's like expected in how it should be in, years beforehand, and how they were married and how they were brought up? Or do you think it's something completely different? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, I do think it's one of those things where it's East versus West mentality. Over here in the States, we have a more individualist style, whereas back home, it's very much all about, the collectivism, what is best for the family. And yeah, there's culture expectations, differences there. And a lot of times, we marry into families and we don't even know what those culture expectations are until they're thrown at us. So it's just, sometimes we're just surprised at how things happen. And yeah, there's just so much potential for there.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. I think also the other thing that we were discussing before the show was the fact that, to have that really strong connection with your spouse, because they can be in between and they can actually be the one to actually the bridge. So what's your ideas around that, about building that spouse relationship as well? Because they can be in between their own parents and their new spouse. And, there's so much, of lots of, basically lots of pressure on the actual spouse themselves to think that, which way do I turn? I've got my mother on one side, I've got my wife on one side. Which way do I turn? What do I do? Especially if they have a difference of opinion, if they have a difference of looking at certain things, and, one wakes up late and they have an issue with that and they think that they're lazy. How is it that we need to sort of move forward where these kind of bickering, even as little or extreme, does not happen, to actually have that sort of like, sanctuary in your new home with your new spouse and their family?
Yes, I think that, again, this is one of those things where before you get married, it's so important to have this discussion with your future husband or future wife. The fact that once you get married, priorities change. So when two people are married, their priority is each other. But that doesn't mean that, the mother-in-law or the father-in-law, that they don't matter as less. It just means that the husband and wife, they are a team and they have to operate like one. So, when little fights happen or big fights happen, it's important that if they are caught in a triangle, that they have created that united front, that they know what their stance is on that situation. And if they are in the middle of a situation where they are in that triangle and they don't know what each other's stance is, set aside 5 minutes, even in the middle of a fight, just step aside, discuss what it is that you want to actually present to your in-laws. And that way you show that, like, you can't get in between us. Don't even try.
Yeah, that's so true. It is so testing when you're actually getting married, when you're actually with somebody that is brand new. And then on top of that, you have to actually also try and have a good relationship with the in-laws, especially if you're going to be living with them. Now, these stories, I'm sure everyone can relate to, whether they are going through it themselves or they know of somebody, whether it's in their household or wherever it may be. And if you want to share your story, please do stay tuned. And we've got more questions for Muska, as well as if you wanted to call in, you're more than welcome to do so. And we are here in a few moments, hopefully taking some calls, and I'll be reading out some of your messages that has already been coming through so far. And we will discuss more on this topic. And inshallah, we'll see you in a few moments. Please do stay with us and we will see you shortly. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live. With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Single Muslim Live here on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. We're here discussing how to get along with the in-laws with Muska Jahan, all the way from Texas. And it's quite interesting that we always feel that there's always a negative story. And I do want you to take this serious, the fact that, this show is here with real scenarios and case studies. And we are only addressing topics that you have asked to actually put forward. And inshallah, whoever's, put that in, do call in. Or if you wanted to share your story tonight, tell us what you're going through, you can do so anonymously on the WhatsApp message, or you can call in live in the studio. The numbers are at the bottom of your screen. Muska, as we were discussing before, the dynamics of the household, especially when a new member comes in, and usually it is the daughter-in-law that comes into the new home with their spouse. and you expect that honeymoon period, and again, you've got different characters in the household. You're trying to build that new bond and connection with your new partner, but on top of that, you've got a mother-in-law, you've got a sister-in-law. Remember, in-laws are not just mother-in-law and father-in-law. You've also got to consider the sister-in-law, the brother-in-law, the extended sort of cousin relatives that are from the other side, and they all play a part. And I think the reason why we have this topic is to show the impact that it has on an individual. That daughter is now in her new home, and their father has now given you that responsibility. It is a responsibility for that new family to take care, and you are accountable just like you would for your own daughter. And many people who may mistreat their new daughter-in-laws have their own daughters, and they have their own daughter's future to consider, but they seem to just dismiss that. And that's what really does surprise us. So when it comes to these extreme sort of cases, which I also want to remind the viewers that maybe we might be, touching territory that may be affecting you and having an impact on you, which is quite negative. And if you do need that support, please do contact us on britishmuslim.tv/support, because this is your well-being at the end of the day. And a lot of cases has risen where they are not happy staying at home, and especially when they're newly married and they love their partner, but unfortunately it's their in-laws that are causing a rift, or they're meddling. Right. So now let's get to the next question. When it comes to the in-laws, being involved in your decision-making, I know you can have all these conversations, but when you're living together and say, for example, you do the dishes one way, or you wake up at a certain time, or you do something else, like how can a new daughter-in-law, for example, come into that household and actually be comfortable and free? Is that even a possibility, or does it actually take a lot of time?
Let's see. I think, especially when they are your new in-laws and you don't really have that much experience with them, you don't know what they're really, really like, it's important to have, a little bit of your guard up and just present yourself in a slightly, formal way. So that way you can kind of study them and they can kind of study you, and you guys, get more comfortable with each other. And then you can figure out how and where and which ways you can be more comfortable. So when it comes to, let's see, I think the first thing you can do is also to make both sides more comfortable is exchange gifts. I think gift exchanging is not only is it recommended by the Prophet, peace be upon him, it is a great way to show your respect and your intention for the relationship and your marriage as well.
Yeah, that is a really good idea. And that is good to actually put your best foot forward, like you said. And of course, to be kind and generous and exchange gifts and things like that. But I'm going to be tough on you now, Muska, and I'm going to say this because at the end of the day, we got to be real on this show, and we address some real issues here. As much as you can do all of that, you can find, for example, a jealous sister-in-law or a jealous mother-in-law because, they've had that relationship with their son from the time he was born. And now all of a sudden you've come in and he's showing you love, which to a certain extent we can understand, right? But at the same time, they're not allowing that space for them to grow. And they're constantly saying things and doing things, which makes now, for example, that husband go to his wife and complain and say, you know what, my mom's not happy with this, or my mom's, my sister's not happy with the way you did this, that, and the other. These are real scenarios. I am not making this up. Unfortunately, it is really one of the things. We've even had a message on Facebook saying, are there even any success stories? So it just goes to show that there are more negative, unfortunately. We don't have the statistics, but there are more negative stories out there than there are actually positive ones. And believe me, if there is any positive ones, I would love for you to share it because we would love to hear your story as well as the ones that are challenging. So at the end of the day, what does it take for an individual, that mother, for example, that father-in-law, that sister, to actually realize that what they are doing is impacting not just that new daughter-in-law, but actually their son, for example? How do you put that forward to somebody? I mean, should they have, regular family meetings? Should that son even confront his actual parents? As much as we know the rights, there is a real it's a difficulty to actually even approach your own parents about your new spouse. How would you suggest that, someone go about something like this?
Yes, for sure. I think that parents of their married children, they need to have some degree of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. They need to understand that their actions can very much affect the status of their children's marriage. So it does take that. But, sometimes parents, they don't have that self-awareness. Their jealousy takes over. They love to gossip. They love to break down someone's confidence, self-esteem. And especially when these cases happen, it's important that the husband, he has to, both the husband and the wife, they need to be like water. If you were like water, it doesn't matter how many times someone tries to start a fire, there's no fire. So it's important not to be reactionary, to try and stay objective and stay calm. I think the husband also needs to make sure that he, places himself in between his wife, and if it's the mother-in-law or the father-in-law, or even the sister brother-in-law trying to pick a fight, that he puts himself between those people and, confronts in a loving way, in a way where they can come to a conclusion. And let's say it's a fight about, maybe his wife is waking up late all the time. And the parents or the siblings-in-laws, they don't realize that maybe she has some sort of sickness. Once they have that discussion and they come at it in a loving way and they, discuss it, then, all those negative feelings that the parents or the siblings had towards your wife, they might be solved. They might be, a lot lower than what they were previously. So it's very important that the husband does not, show anger either towards his wife or towards his family. It's important that he stays like water. That is my best recommendation.
I love that. I love that. That is so true. I love what you're saying. I guess it takes a really different type of individual to be in that way. So basically what you're saying, if somebody's in that position today who is struggling, especially as a woman, because they're the ones usually in a Muslim household, that if they're getting married, they will move into their in-laws' house, if that's how it works. And they're the ones that have to really accommodate. They have to ones to really tolerate as well. And they have to build a particular character within themselves in order to be that way. I mean, there's always conflict in any relationship, even siblings, right? So I guess this is another way of trying to maneuver through conflict and to have that conflict resolution between the in-laws and the new spouse. Now, when you talk about something like self-esteem and confidence, do you not think that that may come across sometimes as being rude? Because if you stand up for yourself, especially with your in-laws, sometimes they might think of you as being shameless. There's lots of, name calling out there to say that you're, standing up for yourself instead of you being respectful and being quiet. Do you think that we just need to be quiet?
Oh, certainly there are times where it is in your best interest to stay quiet. However, I think it's important to show that you do have a voice and that you use your voice when you have to. I think it's important to pick your battles wisely. Let's say you're in a situation where, you constantly have digs at you, but they're kind of meaningless. Maybe you don't pick that battle. But when it comes to how you want to raise your child, and it's very important to you, approach that battle in a way where you are diplomatic, you share your beliefs, and you do it in a way where you're not coming across as aggressive or angry, for sure.
Very true. Yes, of course, that's so true. Your approach needs to be in a way where you're not rude and you're still respectful. And that is something that we all need to obviously think about when we're dealing with our in-laws. However, some in-laws, they do need to take heed as to how they have an impact on that new spouse, as well as their own child who's now newly married, and they're causing that rift, or they're causing that sort of like interference in that marriage. And most parents, they want to see their children happy, but as soon as a new person enters their life, especially when they're the only ones that was taking care of their son, for example, and they were the only ones loving their son and doing everything to make them happy, it is something which is very difficult for parents to overcome. And I think they also need to own and acknowledge that feeling. It's okay to feel like that, but don't take it out on somebody. Don't blame that new person that's walked into your son's life, for example, who's now giving the things that you would still love to give. And I think that's a really good takeaway, to pick your battles and to know when to be quiet and know when to also stand up for yourself and what's right. You mentioned about when it comes to decisions and when it comes to certain things that you can obviously overlook. But when it comes to your children, then that's something that may be where we need to obviously consider. I'm going to basically go back into that question after our break, and we will have Muska answer that for us. However, I'm going to be reading some of your messages as well. Thank you so much so far for interacting on Facebook and YouTube and wherever you're watching. We really are grateful for you streaming in and supporting the show and being part of it as well and giving your comments. It's really lovely to hear your voices. So if you do have more questions, I will read them out, and inshallah, we will also be asking Muska some more questions too. Please do stay with us, stay exactly where you are. We're going to be back very shortly, and we'll be discussing more about the in-laws. And if you want to share your story, you are more than welcome to do so anonymously, or if you want to call in live into the studio. It'll be an amazing to hear some of you speak. But I will be right here, hoping to see you in a few moments. Assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live. With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. We're here, Single Muslim Live on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com, discussing how to get along with the in-laws, a really hot topic, which a lot of us are quite familiar with. Sometimes we just brush it under the carpet, or we think it's part of life, or just as how culture expects us to just, have, relationships which are really challenging. And not all in-laws relationships are challenging. Let me make it clear, we are generalizing here, but there are seen to be an increasing amount of differences where it can create issues. Before the break, we did discuss with Muska as to how challenging it is to actually live with your in-laws, and especially as women, as they're the ones that enter into that new household, being newly married, and how they have to adjust to the new family, the new system, and all the different relationships that are in that household, whether, it's the sister-in-law, the brother-in-law, the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, the extended, cousins and relatives. These are something that we sometimes just, ignore. We complain about, but we just ignore. That's why we're highlighting it today in today's show, so that we can come up with some practical tips, so that we can create some awareness, give some information that how this can really impact your son and future daughter-in-law or son-in-law. And you need to take heed with your sort of actions and be accountable, as well as parents, in-laws, who are actually, treating that future spouse or that, existing spouse, can make a difference to their well-being, their health, as well as your own child's happiness. So Muska, when we're talking about children, and there are differences in bringing up children, obviously even between the two spouses, as much as we can discuss this, before marriage and the spouses agree that this is how we want things done, then we get, the in-laws that want to interfere. If I hear this all the time, unfortunately, it's like they have a routine and they're not allowed to eat, maybe sweets at night, or they, the mother's trying to, be, in a particular way. But then you have the grandparent that walks in and just, gives them a sweet at 9 o'clock just before bed. What do you do in that sort of situation? How do you handle that? What can you advise somebody who's struggling, even when it comes to, okay, forget themselves, they can maybe deal with some of the issues. What about when they're actually rearing and nurturing a new child, into this world, and they're trying to set sort of disciplines and routines, and then the grandparents come in there, and especially when they're living with them, it's really difficult to avoid. How would you advise that individual?
Yes, for sure. I think this is one of those situations where, you want your husband with you and you discuss with either the mother-in-law or father-in-law, whoever's offering the sweets to the child. And you have, that discussion where you talk about, establishing healthy boundaries, and you mention maybe why you don't want to offer sweets at nighttime. Perhaps you can come together with a solution where maybe the sweets are only offered at nighttime on the weekends. Just come up with a sort of compromise where both sides are happy, and that way the grandparents can feel, involved in raising the child, and, have that happiness that comes with spoiling their grandchildren. And the parents are able to, have that routine that they can stick to, at least on the weekdays.
Yeah, no, that's really true. Compromise is really good. And I think also explaining to the in-laws that, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. Because a lot of the times, when different generations are, having children and they have different rules, and, in this day and age, there are more information as to what is, good for you, bad for you, which we all grew up with, some sort of bad habits, which we don't want to continue for our own children. So that could be definitely an education, and hopefully they can adhere to it. So we're hoping for that. So yeah, I love that. The compromise, the conversation. It is true. I think a lot of the conflict can be resolved if we just have some decent conversations and include the in-laws in that. I mean, people living in households today with extended families, and they're literally living in there like flatmates, and they don't actually talk. They don't actually know what's going on. So we need to have, a bit of inclusion. And maybe sometimes there's conflict because there's no inclusion. People are just coming and going and doing their own thing without actually speaking to one another. So maybe to have them involved is a really good idea. The other thing I was thinking of when it comes to the in-laws, okay, we've discussed a little bit about the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. What about like the sister-in-law? And especially when, let's give a scenario of separation or divorce. Especially when there's kids involved, there are still relatives of your children. You are still the mother, the father of that child. Now, there can be a lot of conflict just between the spouses who have separated or divorced, yet those children still love and care and want that relationship with their extended cousins from the other side, as well as want the relationship with their, their grandparents from the other side. Now, what kind of complications comes with that? I mean, that's another area which we never really speak about. And we think once there's a divorce, that's its complete cut. And we don't consider the impact of what it has on those children. What would you advise if somebody's going through that at this moment in time?
Yes, I think this is one of those situations where you have to think about your child rather than just think about maybe the past deeds that have, irritated you or been insulted you. Like, you need to think past yourself. You need to think past your ego and show your child that it is possible to be nice to someone who maybe did you wrong. And it does have a very big impact, because that child is going to grow up thinking, if you do it the wrong way, the child is going to grow up thinking, well, if someone, has done something to me, then I have, full reason to do this to them as well. And they are not going to learn about maintaining good relationships. All they're going to see is people cutting each other off. So yes, for sure.
That is so true. I love what you said right there about putting your children first. And I think it's so difficult when two people are separated or divorced, and the only thing they think about is their own feelings, which is natural, it's normal, it's common. But when you've got children involved, you do need to put that and them first. And them first meaning that, the relationships that you may not like, may not necessarily want to even maintain to a certain extent. You don't have to be best friends anymore. You don't have to have, the gatherings that you would normally, but to still, if there are still relationships that are there, don't interfere to make it worse or to break it or to make it where the children will not have the opportunities. The opportunities are less anyway in a separation and divorce, but to add to fuel to the fire makes it a lot more worse. And a lot of the times, whether it's the sister-in-law or the brother-in-law that are actually interfering with the spouse that has separated and trying to create this conflict, they have children themselves. They have a future for themselves to worry about, that, someone can do that to their own. So they do need to consider that what they're doing is they're also their own relative. And you need to put your ego aside. I love that, Muska. That is so true. A lot of us, we are obviously operating from pain, and with that comes the hate. So when we are hating, it does mean that we are painful. So it will take time. I'm not saying it's going to happen automatically where you're going to continue being, loving to your in-laws or your extended in-laws and families. But if you have Iman, if you have faith, if you're God conscious, and if you are considering your children and you are also responsible and knowing that you're going to be accountable, then you will make better choices and decisions that's going to impact that family, because it is still a family and it's still part of your family. It's really, really important that we understand this. Muska, what are some of the case studies that you have come across that are quite extreme, that are testing, that if someone's going through right now, again, I want to remind the viewers who are watching, who may be having an impact, a negative impact by listening to us tonight. And if you do need some sort of support and some sort of, assistance, please do contact us on BritishMuslim.tv/support. We are here to make sure that we are only giving awareness and information just to make, your homes better. And we are addressing issues for people who are about to get married, who are in marriages, who are also knowing people who are in the situation that may be able to intervene to make it better. We as Muslims are, a society that we have the faith, we have all the sort of ingredients to live in a particular way, but unfortunately we do get sort of sidetracked. And we're just trying to remind you that this is one scenario when you have relationships with your in-laws, that it can actually have a negative impact on your well-being, on your children, as well as yourself in a way that can even end marriages. There are stories where, because of the interference of the in-laws in a negative way, they have actually now resorted to leaving that marriage. Do you know of any of these kinds of cases that you could help? And what would you do before resorting to that sort of decision? I mean, these are extreme cases, but unfortunately they do exist. What is your sort of experience on this, Muska?
Yes, definitely. In my circle, I have observed from afar where there are some women who have just been so mentally, taken advantage of, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to even talk to their spouse anymore because their spouse is fighting them now too. So I think the best thing you can do is just, maybe take some time to get away from the family a little bit, take some time out. Whether that means, just booking a nearby hotel with your husband, just to have that one day off and maybe discuss things. So just have that, one room where they can talk through things and better understand each other. That's probably one of the best things you can do, is just create some sort of a distance, because then you get that perspective and then you can come up with the best approach to handle the situation for sure.
That is so true. Having a mediator is so amazing, to have some outside perspective, so that, whoever is not actually listening, if one spouse is not even, basically on the side of, the other, then they can actually have an outside perspective. I think that's really great advice, actually, to bring someone who is trustworthy so that they can actually come and talk to the family, talk to the spouse, and actually mend that family instead of breaking it. Because a lot of the times it does end up in that way if it's not resolved. And don't tolerate these kinds of things. If it is something that it is an issue, seek that advice and seek that guidance way in advance so that hopefully there is still enough care and love between each other in order for you to fix it. Because when you leave it too long, it actually can take a little bit longer, or maybe there may not be a road for you to actually come back from. And that's what I always find, that with couples, especially experiencing issues from outside family members, they've left it for so many years that the resentment has only built up that they cannot even find it in their hearts for forgiveness. They can't find it in their hearts to have that mercifulness. So we do need to make sure that we do take this seriously. Again, we're going to be going through another short break, and do stay right where you are. We will be back with the final part of the show. It's going by so quickly, but inshallah, we will be asking more questions to Muska, and we'll be discussing a little bit more on getting along with your in-laws. Inshallah, we will see you in a few moments. Make sure that you stay tuned and join us in a few minutes. Assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live. With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Single Muslim Live, the final part of this episode for tonight. And again, it's gone by so quickly, and it's an absolutely amazing discussion here with Muska all the way from Texas. I love having you on the show tonight. We have definitely addressed a lot of things around this issue of getting along with the in-laws. And it is definitely a really sort of touching subject, because, a lot of us, we dream of marriage. We think of, the wedding day. We think of, living with our spouse and how wonderful that honeymoon period is. How long do you think that it really hits home as to, it's actually a lot more than what we actually think and dream of? And what do we need to prepare for when we are thinking of marriage, when it comes to the in-laws especially? Is there a time sort of zone or limit on this?
I mean, a lot of times people encounter the issues right when they're actually planning their weddings. There's cultural differences, there's different expectations. One side has a budget, one side doesn't have a budget. And then they quickly realize, like, oh, this is really hitting home right now. Like, you really have to sit down and find out how to navigate through this right at the beginning. So
that is such a good indicator. I completely slipped my mind, and I forgot about the fact that there's so much red flags when you are entering into a relationship. And it doesn't mean that those red flags are within your potential spouse. It's also when you are getting along and discussing your actual wedding plans. And when there is too much conflict or unnecessary conflict, that's an indicator as well as to what you're actually marrying into. Not to say that you need to leave that relationship, but then there are things that needs to be addressed before you enter that relationship. And these are the kind of opportunities that people ignore. I know a lot of people will say, well, if I bring that up now, then it's going to be an issue. And I'm like, we'd rather have that issue now where there is actually no real commitment than later on, because you don't know how you're going to handle it. So that's really, really crucial what you just said there. The fact that you need to pick up on those signs way before your actual wedding, way before. And, two families are coming together regardless to discuss a lot of things. And in that time, there is so much of, decision making that involves both families. And I think that's an extremely good indicator for anyone who is potentially looking for marriage, to know how is their actual potential in-law, how are they going to be treated, what's the kind of compromise they're going to do. Now, when it comes to the actual well-being of an individual who is entering into that new home, Do you think that it's, easier for men than it is for women when they actually are faced with their in-laws? Or do you think that men, maybe they might get it difficult at the beginning when they're going to be, sized out by, the father-in-law to see if they're, basically fitting up with the daughter. But then after that, they have it easy, plain sailing. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is actually a really good question. I think that for men, like what you said, initially, there is a bit of sizing up that happens. And the parents of the daughters, they're looking at the soon-to-be husband, and they're thinking to themselves, can he provide for my daughter? Can he protect her? Like, these are the main things that men are supposed to do, provide and protect. So, once those two checklists are taken care of, a lot of times, I think that women have it a lot harder because there's so much to pick at. Like, women are mostly, most of us stay at home while we're raising children. And I think that men, if they do receive criticism, it's usually at their job, their place of work. And for a lot of women, their place of work is at home. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I do find that being the actual common ground as well, where women are faced with it, whether they're at home or even working. When they come home to their new home with their in-laws, they're the ones that have to have the brunt of, unfortunately, the circumstances which are negative. And if it is going to be any negativity, it is unfortunately that the women that do experience it more. And this is a shout out. This is an awareness call to potential, spouses out there to look out for the other. Look out for these signs, look out for when there are conflict, and also for the actual in-laws to realize that, okay, it may be daughter-in-law, it may be sister-in-law, but actually there's sister in there. So, look at that first and forget the in-law part and actually treat them like your daughter and treat them like your sister. And I think that will actually make a huge difference just by taking that simple terminology and making it a little bit more special and meaningful. Now, there are characters out there that you have to be nowadays in order to, be strong enough to take on the role of a wife, but also a role of a daughter-in-law, a sister-in-law, a brother-in-law, whatever it may be, because, the brothers do sometimes have it bad too. Okay, let's just be fair and real about it. What kind of personality and characteristics do we need to build within ourselves when we are entering into a marriage, not just to be a potential wife or husband, but to be that in-law, that daughter-in-law, that son-in-law? What would be the certain things that you would advise an individual to be?
Let's see. I'd say one thing is to have confidence. You're going to have differences in opinion, and it's important that you are confident as these situations come. And it's also important to play the role of someone who wants peace. Like, you have to, sometimes there's situations where, you get your insult thrown at you. Someone is, doing so much, but you almost have to take yourself out of that situation and almost play your own mediator. And again, look past your ego, so that way you can eventually solve that problem or just reach that, beautiful, beautiful compromise. So yeah, confidence and willing to look past sometimes the many, many things that come your way.
No, that's so true. That's so true. Like you said at the beginning, you have to pick your battles, and a lot of us can get carried away with little things that are not really that important anyway. And I think it helps when you can actually pick and choose what exactly does matter and what doesn't. So, because other people can't change, and you don't have control over that. But what you do have control over is yourself, your responses and your reactions. I guess, getting married is not just a struggle to a certain extent between the spouses. It's actually trying to navigate and work towards relationships with the in-laws, because we're here, we want to make it work. We want to help people so that they are aware that these are the real scenarios. A lot of people that are thinking of marriage, especially young girls and young men today, they're just thinking about the other partner, when actually you're going into an entirely new world. You're going into a whole different family dynamic, and you have to be part of that. You can't ignore it. And whatever problems you have in your own home, if that can be resolved, that's an indicator as well that you can actually have also these good relationships with your in-laws, because a lot of people want to get married to escape their own household if it's not that great. And I always give that advice to say, look, get it right in your own home, because when you go somewhere new, don't think that it's going to be an escape where it's going to go into some sort of utopia. even better. In fact, it can be a lot worse. I mean, I think no matter how intellectual, how professional our status are today, we still are struggling with dealing with relationships. And that's why we have this show. That's why we continuously have these topics and bring amazing guests like yourself so that we can actually talk about this a lot more. What other sort of like situations and advice can you rise, from this topic? As we've only got, maybe another 10 minutes more, it's really important that we get as much as we can with regards to giving some sort of information and awareness about, we want to build better relationships with your in-laws. So how would you sort of like, give some more support to people that may be struggling in this situation?
Let's see. I would say, if you are going through a very hard time, again, try to create some distance for at least a day or two. Just get out, gain some perspective, maybe talk to someone you trust, and they can probably give you the best advice. And make sure that the person you trust is someone who is not going to spread that, gossip about you as well, and someone who is able to look at it objectively. Gain some distance, speak to someone who you trust. And along with that, I think it's just important that you show your in-laws like you are trying to maintain peace. Like you are really trying to maintain that peace. And sometimes when we show that vulnerability, it's hard. It's very hard to show that. The other side can maybe look past the differences and then eventually, you reach that peace.
Brilliant. I love that. Yeah. Just before we end, would you advise nowadays, especially in society in this generation, to actually live with their in-laws, or would you advise against it?
I think first you have to, really, really know yourself, know thyself. So if you know that you are someone that is very explosive, if you have a very short temper, then it's going to be very hard for you. But there's pros and cons to both sides. If you live away from your in-laws, if you have your own like apartment or house, you are able to build a really strong bond with your partner without outside influences involved. However, if you do live with your in-laws, there is a lot of monetary, there's a lot of money that you can save by doing that. So yes, and also, I just had a baby, and alhamdulillah, like after I had my baby, like because I have such a good relationship with my in-laws, my mother took care of me after I had the baby, and my mother-in-law took care of me after I had the baby. They also took care of my baby. So it was a very beautiful time where I had all the support I needed. And as we all know, it takes a village to raise a child. So there was my village.
I love that. No, that's so true. Yeah. We want to highlight that, there can be amazing relationships and extended families, lots of benefits if you do get along with your in-laws and you do try and have better relationships despite some of the differences. I mean, we did highlight some of the extreme cases tonight, but I think inshallah, I'm hoping that, most of the time we can work around it, but there are certain things that you can do to adjust if you are going through certain issues. So then hopefully we can have better households with the in-laws. I want to thank you so much, Muska, for coming in tonight and giving your time and all, the advice and tips and strategies. I really appreciate it, especially being a new mom and, giving us your time. I really am so honored, honestly. Thank you so much for being with us today. And please do keep in touch. Please do follow Muska. She has an amazing channel, which, discussing a lot of things, including relationships. I want to also thank everybody that has tuned in and streamed in tonight and sending in your comments and questions. And again, it's been an amazing show and another topic. And we can only do this with your sort of like insights and awareness and giving us a lot of your feedback, which we do appreciate. A very, very good night from all of us here on British Muslim TV. Thank you so much for watching today. And inshallah, we will be back next week with another topic and another guest. Have a lovely evening. Assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.